going to talk about early European explorers and how they furthered the cause of exploration. Our timeline shows in the year 1000, Leif Erikson reached North America. 1350, the Renaissance begins in Europe. 1420, Prince Henry the Navigator sends Portuguese explorers to Africa. And in 1498, Vasco da Gama reaches India. We're going to find that the big talk at this time in the 1400s, late 13 to early 1400s, was sea routes to Asia and sea routes to Africa. Let's start with the Vikings. The Vikings were a group of Europeans who lived in Scandinavia in Northern Europe. They were skilled sailors. They sailed as far east as Asia, as far west as North America, and as far south as Africa. Eric the Red was a Viking who lived in Iceland. Eric had a little bit of a temper, had a hard time getting along with others, was actually kicked out of Iceland, so went to Greenland. He named it Greenland. Greenland is not a very green place. It's very cold, icy, inhospitable, not a very good place to live. Called it Greenland, hoping to lure people there. That was in the year 982. His son, Leif Erikson, in the year 1000, had heard rumors of a land to the west and wanted to go out and explore. So he traveled west, landing in a place that he christened Vinland in the year 1000. Called it Vinland because of all of the grapes growing there. Probably, the evidence shows this was modern-day Newfoundland in Canada. He was there for about 15 years. Conflicts with the Native Americans sent him back to Scandinavia. Now, what evidence do we have that he truly was in North America 500 years before any other European, 500 years before Christopher Columbus or anyone had even thought about going that way? Well, sagas. Sagas are the archaeological evidence we have. Sagas are long spoken tales, long written tales, and some of these sagas were left behind on rune stones, giving us the evidence that, yes, Leif Erikson was here. He was the first European to set foot on North America. Fast forwarding a little bit, we get to the Renaissance. The Renaissance literally means rebirth. It was occurring in about 1350 in Italy. The people no longer just had to concentrate and focus on their daily life, getting their needs met. Food, shelter, etc., etc. Life was getting to be a little bit easier. Still rougher than it is in modern times, but a little bit easier. People had time now to put emphasis on learning. So they learned about the arts. They learned about sciences. It was all about learning. Studied other cultures. In 1450, we have a wonderful invention. Johann Gutenberg invented something that changed life completely, and that was the printing press. Prior to the printing press, which could print out books in a much faster fashion, before that, if you wanted a book, it had to be hand copied by someone. So say something even short, like a 100-page book, if someone had to copy it word for word, that could take months until you could get it. Obviously, if something's so labor intensive, it's going to be expensive. So because of that, not as many people could read at that time, and ideas were slow to spread. It was not a real learn time for the world. Now, all of a sudden, ideas are spreading quickly because people are learning to read and books are much more accessible. Also at this time, ship design, ship building, Chinese ideas about navigation were all being shared. And if you put those three things together, you've got ships that could go farther and ships that could go faster, which obviously is going to speed up exploration. The Portuguese in Europe, in the country of Portugal, were noticing there was a large demand for goods from Asia. Well, to get those goods, you had to travel on the Silk Road. Remember, the Silk Road is not just one road, it's a network of trade routes. Well, those could be dangerous, it could take a long time, and they were controlled by the merchants along them, so it could be very costly. So what do you do when you're confronted with something that's not ideal? You look for a solution. Could that solution be sea routes? Could we find sea routes that would get us to Asia, and they would be safer and faster and quite honestly cheaper? Well, Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal, thought that that was a possibility. Prince Henry brought together experts on shipbuilding, ship design, map making, navigation, and they studied and came up with different ideas. He also sent out explorers to explore the African coast. And as they did that, they were able to map the coast in a much more detail than anyone had previously known. And they could also talk about the conditions, the sailing conditions. What time of the year was a more optimal time, a better time to sail? What time of the year would you maybe want to avoid due to hurricanes or storms and such? Those were all the positive things. Because he sent people there, Africa was getting to be more known to them. The negative side, slave trade, really started to escalate. Because these explorers were there so often and traders were starting to go back and forth, they were bringing captive Africans back to Europe to become servants and slaves. Lastly, we have Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama did something that Bartolomeu Diaz was unable to do 10 years previously. In 1497, Vasco da Gama was able to go around the Cape of Good Hope. The Cape of Good Hope is at the southern tip of Africa, and due to storm conditions and such and fear, no one had been able to do this before. This was important. This got us to the other side of Africa. What's over there, I wonder? 10 years before, Bartolomeu Diaz tried to do that because of storms and a very fearful crew. At this time, rumors circulated that the sea was bubbling, there were sea monsters and such, and men would believe it because they didn't know any different. Their world wasn't like ours with the internet where we can find out facts at the tip of our fingertips with the stroke of a keyboard. They didn't know, so they became fearful. He had to turn back. Once the Cape of Good Hope was circled, we were to India in no time at all, and merchants set up in Calicut, India. A thriving Portuguese trade started up there, and all of a sudden people knew, you know what, we can go west, and we can find out what's on the other side.